The 1st of January, 1945. Asch Airfield, Y-29, Belgium. A thin mist drifts along the tree line. Thaw streaks gleam on the runway. Two P-51 seconds lift their noses, wheels still trembling in the wells. The engines are smooth even. Then the real sound arrives, a low rip at pine top height. W-190 seconds slide across the runway. Threshold gun ports already bright. They think they've caught another American field half asleep. They've done this before. They are relaxed. The lead Mustang holds it down a half beat longer. The prop bites the tail, shivers the gear, snaps shut. He drags through a fresh curl of black smoke. The sight picture steadies for a blink. Press. 6. 50 seconds. Stitch a straight ribbon into the left wing root of a 190, raking the strip. The German airframe twitches, nose dips, and plows a grey scar through frozen grass. Off the right, another attacker runs the takeoff lane, aiming to cut the climber that just left the ground. Number 2 has the speed. Roll. Half turn. Hold the tops of the trees. Brake. High left. Radio calls are short and dry. The gyro asks for more lead than instinct allows. Trust it. Press. Fire crawls along a cowl seam, then peels downstream and snaps at the tail. Above Y-29, the air goes empty for a beat. The RPM needle sits in the green. The throttle feels like cold iron under a glove. No one tells a story on the net, no long orders. Just heat on the canopy and the taste of burned metal. Silence. By late December 1944, the front is a moving hinge of snow fuel cans and short daylight. The Ardennes offensive has opened a bruise in the Allied line. Ground commanders ask for air that arrives when the sky briefly clears and stays long enough to matter. Germany's calculation is simple. If Allied fighters can be shocked on the ground at dawn and dragged away from the columns by noon, the army buys hours. Hours are all that remain. The Luftwaffe still carries an old memory that fuels confidence. Surprise at low level has worked before. Treetop ingress hides in ground clutter. A first pass over a crowded field harvests aircraft that cannot roll in time. A fast egress erases the return address. In the same memory, Allied escorts are heavy on procedure and light on agility. They have rendezvous times, tanker habits, altitude blocks. If you hit them at the seam, weather lifting, fuel checks underway, wheels coming up, the reaction lags. Opposite that memory is a system that has learned the cost of being late. In 1943, the deep raid belt was where bombers died. Escorts ran out of gas at the edge of range. Fighters returned empty and left the stream naked on the way home. The answer in 1944-45 is not a slogan. It is scheduling. Night crews turn airframes with the discipline of a rail yard. Ammunition is belted and staged before first light. Drop tanks are treated as mission enablers, not extras. Pilots brief to fight after the rendezvous, not just to meet it. Ground control works the VHF net with short plane vectors, and the groups nearest the weathercrack launch without ceremony the moment the ceiling permits. That is the frame in which New Year's morning opens at Y-29. The German expectation is that an airfield caught at rotation speed is a row of metal that cannot bite back. The Allied assumption, now hardwired, is that the first element to lift is already a combat patrol. That difference sets the stakes. If the Luftwaffe's strike doctrine still outruns Allied reaction by 2 or 3 minutes, tactical air support across the Ardennes hesitates. Columns move without overhead cover. Bridges and road junctions breathe for a day. If instead, the runway itself can turn into a merge within seconds, and the local escort can climb into the egress lanes with fuel to stay, then the strike bleeds leaders for no operational gain. Range is not a brochure line here. It decides who has options after first contact. A Mustang arriving over the fight with internal fuel remaining is not forced into a single pass and a sprint home. It can accept a turning fight, break an egress, and still cover the next grid for the artillery spotter 10 minutes later. The Luftwaffe pilot flying a dawn dash on rationed gas does not own that choice. Every correction eats margin. A second attempt at the field means entering the same watched air again. Pilot quality and replacement logic turn the screw tighter. German formations on this morning carry skill, but the skill sits in cockpits that cannot be replaced at the rate they are risked. A lost leader is not a number, it is a missing teacher for the next scramble. Allied groups by this phase rotate veterans through flights and feed replacements into a system that measures flight hours like inventory. When a blue-nosed section wins a 2-minute fight over its own runway and comes back with airframes intact, the lesson is not glamour. It is throughput. The same names fly again tomorrow, while the other side is lighter in experience by sundown. Weather, often a German ally, also cuts both ways now. In the first years of the war, marginal ceilings handicapped rigid schedules. In this window, they handicap the side that needs one perfect hole in the overcast to make a low-level strike count. The Allies run many fields and many clocks. If one base is socked in a neighbouring group covers the grid, the net connects them. A scattered Luftwaffe force that must be both unseen and precisely on time has less slack. A 5-minute slip meets a runway already awake. Strategically, the question is not abstract. The Battle of the Bulge depends on whether German armoured thrusts can move by day without being cut, and whether depots near the front can function under fighter-bomber attention. Air superiority is the condition under which ground plans either breathe or suffocate. Keep escorts over the arteries, and daylight movement becomes a negotiation, paid in destroyed vehicles and burned bridges. Fail to keep them there even for a morning and a narrow chance opens for a breakout or a rescue of a trapped battalion. That is why an episode anchored to WWII is more than an anecdote about a scramble. It is a proof under pressure of a broader claim. The Allied fighter system now reacts inside the Luftwaffe's strike rhythm. The Mustang is the visible part, the machine that can be at the decision point with the fuel and sight picture to finish the first contact, but the reason it arrives on time is the conveyor behind it. The Luftwaffe can still hurt. It cannot curate when and where enough to survive its own losses. From this morning forward, each attempt to buy time with blood spends more than it earns. A low-level strike gives you seconds. If you are on the runway, those seconds are geometry and nerve. Lift clean, don't balloon, don't eat your own prop wash, and don't chase the first flash of metal like a dog after a truck. The Mustang lets you make one choice that matters at once, keep it down half a beat longer, so the prop really bites, then accept the shudder in the tail as the gear locks away. If you lift a touch dirty, you lift alive. If you lift clean and late, you lift already turning. Fuel is the first survival item, not a number on a board. You burn the externals to fumes on the way in. You are on internal when the horizon turns into a moving problem. That is why a Mustang over the field can fight after the first pass, instead of sprinting for home with the tank lights complaining. A German pilot making a dawn dash has to plan the egress in his head even as he enters the pattern. Every correction costs distance. A second try at the field is not just courage, it is a bet against the clock on the gauge. Sight picture controls whether you live long enough to talk about power. The gyro sight settles a wobble your hands cannot settle in time. In ground haze, with a crossing target instinct underleads, the glass tells you more sooner. The trick is to believe the reticle, while your stomach still says no. One press through a 2-second window is what the 6 Brownings are for. You are not carving sculptures. You are turning a moving shape into a silent one before it can make a second decision. If you hold the trigger like a confession, you will overheat barrels and paint the air. If you tap it like a surgeon, you will take a wing route, a coolant line, or the pilot's canopy, and the fight is over in the time it takes to inhale. Roll rate matters more than pride when the first pass fails. A Fokker-Wulf wants you to play in his plane quick aileron knife-edged reversals, a scissors that makes you bleed speed until you are a target. The answer is not to win his game, it is to leave his game. Keep the turn flat. Keep the engine in the band where it hauls the airframe through the arc without asking for altitude you don't have. If he tries to drag you vertically, check your speed, thumbs distance to the throttle stop, and decide if you own the climb. If not, go oblique, force him to keep you in the glass longer than his nerves like, and make him pick between keeping sight and keeping energy. The moment he glances for the horizon line, you take the shot you've been building. Climb rates on paper read like bragging rights. Climb rates in winter air are a ledger of oxygen and time. The Mustang can turn a desperate rotation into a controlled merge because it carries speed out of the takeoff and keeps it while the prop stays truly biting. You will feel that as a turn that does not mush and a nose that does not sag when you ask it to walk across a target at pine-top height. The German will feel it as a victim that refuses to stay victim long enough to be harvested. If he tries to corkscrew up and away, the question is not, can you match it, but can you still see him when his wings pass through the sight ring? The K-14 answers that by keeping the ring honest while your body lies to you. Gunnery at this height is a debt you pay in inches. You set convergence for the work you actually do. On a day like this, you are not sniping at contrails. You are sewing into aluminum at short range through prop wash and shock. Against thin skins, a short burst into the root or the cowl ends fights without theatre. Against a 109 coming head-on with cannon lit, you do not trade jousts. You displace a half airplane off his line and let him commit to empty space while you cut across the place he will be a half-second later. If you win the nose-to-nose by being brave, you lose later to debris and luck. If you win it by being off-axis with a steady pull and a correct lead, you live to find the egress he thought he owned. Engine management is not romance, it is the throat you breathe through. In this weather, the oil is slow and the coolant is sulking. Overboosting to feel strong will push the needle past a place the Merlin likes to sit. You want the power band that keeps the prop disc biting clean without tearing at the mounts, the RPM that holds in the green when the nose swings across the horizon and the airflow gets lumpy. In a sustained turn at tree height, a sloppy hand gives up knots you can't afford and makes the radiator doors work harder than they should. A single hole in that radiator is a fuse. You can feel the heat creep, and you can smell the liquid you will run out of. That is why opening with a one-press hit matters more than half a minute of glorious tracers. Visibility is a weapon. The bubble canopy does not just make you feel modern. It lets you keep tally on shapes, trying to exit down your six while you finish the first target. You do not unstrap your eyes to look for them. You lift your chin a degree, and they are where you left them. A German pilot in a heavier frame line at low level has to pick moments to check. In those moments he loses the one gift his aircraft still gives him, the ability to make you chase him into the vertical and fail. If you deny him that by keeping him in your glass and denying him time, he has to choose between rolling hard enough to black the corners of his vision or accepting that the next press will happen somewhere he cannot watch and fly at. Once, takeoff under fire is not a scramble. It is a knife fight in which your shoes are still untied. You keep a touch of flap until the gear is away, you accept a dirty second. If the nose drops across a wake and you do not snap to a steep climb the first time, instinct barks. Level a beat, let the airspeed live, then turn that life into the first lateral move that saves you. The radio is not for conversation, it is for three-word facts you can use: brake, high left, clear. Clutter kills the pattern. Silence with information keeps 4 airplanes from dying to the same surprise. Ammunition is not weight, it is options. 6 guns mean you can afford a second fight without feeling naked. But that only holds if you didn't waste it on fear. Count your presses as you breathe. If you've made more than 3 in a minute, you probably told the sky you were scared. The man who is not scared wastes ammo too. He paints a dead airplane because his brain wants a movie. You stop firing when the target stops being a problem, not when it explodes. German armament is a fact you respect. A head-on pass with 20mm is not a place for faith. You don't stand in the aisle for it, you slide the aisle. Their roll rate at low altitude can make you feel slow. It is supposed to. If you follow their reversals out of pride, you will be slow by proof. Keep your airspeed. Make one clean lateral. Force them to commit to a line they thought you would occupy. Then write the correction they will have to make onto your sight glass and wait the half-second it takes to bring the reticle to where the correction ends. The moment you see the canopy frame fatten, you are already in range. When the first seconds pass and the air above the runway belongs to someone, the fight moves to the egress lanes. This is where range shows up with teeth. If you have gas, you climb a sliver and step into the door the raiders need. They will try to drag you past your comfort, and you will let them, because comfort is not fuel. Fuel is fuel. Your wingman is not a decoration. He is the reason the man who just overshot you dies when he believes he is safe. The call is short, the turn is short, the burst is short, the result is long. Winter light lies. The low sun makes friend and foe share the same grey. Your eyes will reach for the brightest, your sight will favor the clean silhouette, and the one that kills you will be the one shaped like a shadow against trees. You have to fly your search pattern even in a knife fight. Left shoulder check, slight lift of chin, glance through the quarter back to the sight. If your hands start doing what your neck should, you are about to fly where someone else is aiming. All of this adds to one habit that keeps you alive and ends the other man's day. Decide before the merge what you will not do. You will not chase a dive you cannot finish. You will not pull past the RPM that keeps the engine honest for the sake of feeling fast for 2 seconds. You will not talk a long sentence on the radio. You will not take a second shot at a target already dying while a living one slides into your blind quarter. You will not believe your instinct over the sight when the ring asks for more lead than your courage does. Do the opposite of those 5, and the airplane pays you back. It pays you back with a first merge that turns into your fight with a burst that ends a pass instead of starting a duel with an engine that pulls the way you asked when the trees are a hand's span under your wingtip. It pays you back with a climb into the exit lanes, while the other side has to fly home on a plan that does not survive its first correction. And when the air finally goes empty for a beat, and the RPM needle sits steady in the green, it pays you back with silence, the kind that means you can choose where the next fight happens, instead of asking to be allowed to leave this. 1. The canopy is already fogged at the edges from his breath, when the tower light flicks, and the hand on the throttle slides to the stop. He squeezes his shoulders once to settle the harness, and feels the webbing dig under the jacket. The runway center line blurs under frost. The Merlin is warm enough to answer without sulking. The needle sits just below where the crew chief said, "Don't live there," and he keeps it there. Brakes. Release. The Mustang rolls clean rudder, tapping to pin the nose into the light cross. A tremor runs through the tail when the tail wheel lifts. He wants to haul it off and climb into safety. He holds it down a heartbeat longer because he learned the hard lesson in training. If the prop bites with airspeed, you keep the airspeed when life starts happening. The wheels snap away. The shudder is gone. A line of pine at the end of the world rises like a wall. The first wrong sound is a coarse ripping, not flak. It comes from the left, low. He doesn't look for the airplane. He looks for the light in the corner of his eye, the moving smear that is not runway. It arrives as a grey wedge sliding across the numbers with gun flashes, short and ugly. He does not speak. His thumb bumps the radio switch out of habit, and then off of it, because words waste oxygen. The sight ring blooms into the glass like a calm thought in a busy head. He does what the instructors beat into him, lift the nose to put the ring where it belongs, not where fear says. The gyro wants more lead than feels moral at this height. He trusts it over himself. Squeeze. 6 barrels start flat and then dig. The target twitches exactly like the film reels said it would if he hit the root. The engine smokes black. The canopy of the other airplane flashes with a brief orange, then turns opaque and goes down in a shallow, terrible grace. Instinct says climb hard. He does not. He levels a breath to hold knots and drags the nose across the trees instead. Air under the wing is thick and honest. The second attacker is where he should be if he wanted to cut a takeoff, running the lane nose, hunting the runaway. The Mustang rolls without complaint. The seat climbs into his back and stays there. He hears a clipped brake from somewhere and doesn't answer because he is already moving. The reticle skates over grey-green and won't sit. He stops trying to make it sit and lets it float while the airplane does the work. The ring settles by itself when the motion matches. Press. Short. The cowl seam on the other aircraft blossoms fire along one side like a zipper pulled in reverse. The smell that comes through the vents is sweet and metallic, and it lives behind his teeth. He breathes once through his nose because the mask tastes of rubber. The RPM needle is in the green, manifold where it should be, radiator door where muscle memory throws it without looking. He forces his eyes through the quartering check, right shoulder, left shoulder, up quick dip of the wing to clear under the nose. The bubble is why he still owns the next second. A shape that could befriend snaps past his left quarter. The paint on the nose is blue enough to call off the shot he almost took. He swallows without meaning to. The throat clicks loud inside the helmet. He doesn't announce any of this. His calls when they happen are nouns and angles. High left, clear. He hears one reply from a voice that sounds like it's speaking around a coin. On it. The net is a room of men too busy to narrate. He notices in the part of his head that stores what matters later that this is the third time in a month he has fought with gas left instead of cutting out to bingo the moment the first pass ended. He files it without words as the reason his hands are not shaking. The trees flicker in the corner of his eye like slow lightning. He drags the sight across the strip again and sees no more muzzle flash. A shadow climbs away toward the east low and tightening the motion of someone trying to open a door that used to be easy. He slides a finger under the throttle to feel the stop, makes a choice to keep it just shy to save the engine from a temper, and leans into the turn that will put him into the egress lane. He is uncomfortably aware of how much he trusts the airplane now. The trust is not affection. It is math. It will do what he asks if he asks inside the boundaries. Across the pine tops, a German pilot rides his own machine like it is a lie he can make true. He came in at tree height with his eyes on the concrete and the soft metal parked beside it. The approach was clean until the first American broke the script by being airborne inside the pass. The second broke it by turning inside a climb that should have punished him. Now the German is rolling hard enough that the edges of his vision go black, and he has to blink the world open again. The gun switch is hot. The sight is right where it should be for a man who grew up on fixed rings and shooting instinct. The airplane in front does not obey the instincts of a target. It doesn't balloon. It doesn't keep climbing to be chopped. It stays level for a beat to get fast, and then it is behind his shoulder, not in his guns. He makes the choice he always made, drag the fight up and away the place. The 190's roll and the 109's climb live like old friends. The air feels dense, the controls talk through the stick. Then the radio in his ear crackles flat nonsense. Someone somewhere is saying too many and the voice sounds small. He glances outside to find the friend who should be half a fuselage length off his right and sees only the absence of a shape. He does not have the seconds to count why. His engine is good, his fuel is not generous. The plan called for a single pass, a second. If the field was slow to react, then the river line and a climb to safety. The second pass never comes, because the first one did not push them off the runway, it pulled them into the sky. He cannot outroll what he cannot see. He cannot outrun what refuses to be left behind. He feels the first punch before he hears it, a heavy glove somewhere under his left heel. The airplane yaws as if insulted. Heat creeps into the footwell. He pushes rudder to keep the nose honest and tastes the air in the mask go wrong. He has two choices that matter: ride it level and hope the fire is a momentary flare, or pull up to trade speed for altitude and become the largest, slowest thing in a small sky. He tries the third thing men try. When the first two are bad, he sketches a shallow descending right that points toward a gap between trees and hopes the force that hit him is not the second one arriving. The canopy bows a fraction, as if something hot is cupping it from outside. He understands suddenly, and with no emotion, that this is a field full of men who launch with gas enough to fight and radios that speak fast and short, and that his unit is here to spend men in the hope that surprise can still buy. Safety. He wonders at the neatness of the plan he was given. He has no space left to resent it. Back over the strip, the American sees the smoke line and does not chase it into the ground. He has learned a thing that looks like restraint and is really arithmetic. You do not follow a dying airplane to film your own victory. You clear the quarter, put your wing where your wingman needs it, and keep the door blocked. He says nothing. His hand sits steady on metal that has warmed under the glove. The instrument faces are calm. The throttle is a bar of iron that will do what he asks if he asks with a grown hand. He is not triumphant. He is not detached. He is very busy and a little thirsty. A minute ago the runway was an exit. Now the air above it feels like a room he recognizes and can arrange. He checks the pattern again, shoulder-chin quarter back to glass. The radio gives him one more useful word, clear, and he accepts it without ceremony. When the noise drops a degree and no new shapes push out of the trees, he lets his breathing grow longer. Heat climbs the canopy and slides away with the slipstream. The smell of burned glycol lingers like old pennies. His mind is already moving down the list. The crew chief will want rounds expended, temperatures, any knocks he felt through the stick. He will say those things in the order they matter, and leave out how his mouth went dry for 10 seconds when the second airplane ran the lane. That is not lying. That is saving the air for what keeps you alive tomorrow. He looks once down the runway at the patch where the frost is charred, and then away from it because staring at scars makes you fly badly. He does not think the day is won. He thinks the next 2 minutes will either cost him a friend or cost the other side another leader. He knows which outcome the system behind him is built to multiply. He keeps his mouth shut and his eyes open and waits for the next decision that only lasts a heartbeat but feels like a door. The system that keeps a fighter over a battlefield is not a wing shape or a horsepower number. It is a calendar that does not slip. By this phase of the winter, the calendar is American. The parts that matter are invisible at first. Look how far a decision has to travel before an airplane moves. How many tasks are done before the sun comes up. How many errors are forgiven because spares and crews exist to absorb them. Doctrine changed because the old way bled. In the deep raid year, escorts met the stream, stayed tight, and reacted to threats that had already formed. Pilots burned fuel in close cover, and were forced to leave when the bombers reached the point where they were most hunted. The correction was unromantic. Escorts take the route in and out, not the formation edge. They break up ambushes before they are tidy. They arrive with fuel to fight after the rendezvous, and stay until the return leg is safe. Instead of a leash, there is a beltway of fighters that turns ahead of time and behind the formation, catching the slashes that used to be free shots. That doctrine only works if 3 other things work. First, ground control speaks simply and quickly. VHF nets feed altitude bearing and height corrections in short words and plain language. Controllers do not deliver speeches, they give angles. A group close to weather will launch the second. A ceiling lifts enough to keep wings attached to air. The voice on the net keeps multiple squadrons from flying the same sky blind. Second, the equipment inside the cockpit compresses the time from seeing to hitting. A gyro sight that steadies an estimate into a habit reduces the amount of air a pilot has to waste to get a hit. Third, the airplane arrives with fuel left in the body tanks. Range is not a sentence in a manual. It is the permission to take a second fight without writing your own exit order. Maintenance tempo turns doctrine into reality. Night crews work a schedule that reads like a timetable. Tires, plugs, guns, and hydraulics are serviced to a list that prioritizes sorties per day over beauty. Ammunition is belted before dawn. Work stands live beside every third revetment. A power cart is never far from a prop arc. Engines are swapped by procedure, not ceremony. A damaged airplane is counted not as a story, but as a turnaround time. The result is that a squadron's first 2 ship can roll at weather minimums, and the next pair follows without a gap. By the time a surprise arrives at tree height, there are already airframes over the field, with pilots who briefed to fight, not to vacate. Supply and parts make that possible. Interchangeable items and standard kits mean a crew chief does not spend the morning scavenging from the far end of the base. When a box of gun springs looks like every other box of gun springs across a theatre, a weapon goes back into service in minutes, not days. Fuel is staged forward in a way that keeps a margin at the point of use. External tanks are not requests, they are baseline. When pilots brief to burn externals to fumes before the line of contact and fight on internal, they are reciting a plan that logistics already paid for. Training and replacement keep the tip from going dull. American units rotate experienced pilots through flights and feed replacements through a pipeline that measures hours and checks. A section leader can go home on schedule and leave behind 2 lieutenants who know exactly how the net sounds when a controller is busy and how the sight picture lies in ground haze. On the other side of the sky, experience is concentrated in a few men who fly too often and sleep too little. When they are lost in a morning like this, a unit's memory goes with them. The next scramble is shorter in hours and thinner in judgment. Risk posture follows from that logic. If you can replace what you lose, you take chances that create contact at the place you want it. If you cannot, you hoard assets and hope for perfect conditions. That is the split on this winter day. American commanders accept a messy takeoff under fire because the system can digest bent metal and reissue another pair by noon. German commanders send experienced formations low and fast at dawn to buy a hole in the day. The bet is that surprise will be enough to leave before the response arrives. The bet fails when the first two Mustangs lift with gas and calm radios and point themselves not away from trouble but through it. Weather used to be an ally to the force that needed surprise. Now it is an ally to the force that can fly many fields and coordinate across them. If one base sits under a lid, another sits under a slit, and the net stitches them together. The side that relies on one perfect sealing break at one time to make a strike count finds that a 5-minute slip delivers them to a runway with wheels already up. The side that launches in increments fills the nearby air with enough metal that a low-level pass does not meet stillness but reaction. Loss accounting closes the loop. After action, American groups turn what happened into checklists that actually get used. Lift a beat longer, trust the ring, do not chase into the ground, fuel status at each merge. These are not slogans. They become part of the brief the next morning. On the German side, the lessons exist, but the hours to teach them and the airplanes to absorb the mistakes are missing. A note in a report cannot train a pilot who will fly 2 more times this week, sleep badly, and lead replacements who have not fired live guns in anger. Infrastructure makes surprises less surprising. Perimeter tracks and warm-up pens keep the path to the runway clear, even when trucks and handcarts clog the infield with fuel and ammo. De-icing is a plan, not a debate. A flare rack works. The first pair rolls when it should not, after a committee decides whether the fog is friendly. The runway has priority, and every job on the field exists to keep it that way. The reward is what happened at Y-29. The place the strike expected to be helpless was a place where procedures were already in motion. Engagement rules shift with confidence. Escorts untie from their bombers as needed and hunt the transit lanes in front of and behind the heavy stream. Intercepts no longer wait for the enemy's choice of altitude and sun. They get stacked in the places raids must pass. The effect is that a low-level force that plans to be present for a few minutes finds those minutes spend themselves faster than expected. Disengagement routes that were empty become doors with men standing in them. Industrial depth pays for tempo. Every hour a crew chief spends is paid for by a train that arrived yesterday, not a requisition that will be debated next month. Engines are built with the assumption they will be run, hard, changed, and torn down again for parts. Airframes are not shrine objects. When a pilot bends a wheel in a rough landing after a close-in fight, the field does not mourn. It jacks, swaps, and launches another. The pilot returns to a cockpit the following day because there is a cockpit to return to. Decision speed shortens on the American side. A report from a sector can reroute a patrol in minutes, because the authority to do it sits near the microphone that says it. There is no ritual between seeing and moving. On the German side, fuel, weather, and orders create a narrow window in which movement is allowed. The system is cautious because it is brittle. Caution makes it slower than the sky it is trying to control. The egress problem becomes a doctrine problem. A low strike is supposed to hit once, maybe twice, and then leave by a line agreed hours earlier. If that line is watched by local escort with fuel to climb into it, the strike has to trade speed for angle and bleeds safety while it searches for a gap. A pilot can still survive by flying better than the man behind him. A unit cannot survive repeated mornings where the door costs a leader and 2 good wingmen. The ledger is not aircraft lost, it is people who knew how to teach. Debriefing culture matters. Allied pilots return state what they did in order log rounds and temperatures, note where the sight lied and where the radio saved a life. Intelligence officers stitch those remarks into a map of how the enemy tried to solve the day. That map is briefed before the next dawn. The Luftwaffe can build similar documents. It cannot ensure the men who need them will be alive and fresh enough to apply them. Fatigue and loss turn data into trivia. Control of the ground picture reinforces all of this. Artillery spotters, road reconnaissance, and bridge strikes are available because fighters keep the corridors open. The ground does not have to wait for a hole in the sky to move. The enemy has to create holes and run men through them while being watched. Each failed attempt burns fuel and competence. Each successful attempt still risks return in a sky that is not empty anymore. None of this is a claim that one airplane turned the war. It is a claim that one airplane fit inside a system that decided where and when daylight fights would take place. The Mustang's part is to be present to keep its energy through the first violent turn to deliver a short, correct burst when a sight picture offers itself, and to still have gas after that burst to climb into the route the enemy needs to live. The rest of the machine, radios, crews, parts, commanders willing to trade metal for time, keeps that behavior repeatable. On mornings like WWII, the old German script arrive unannounced, erase a row of parked aircraft, leave at speed, meets a field that thinks of itself as a launch platform, not a parking lot. The first two fighters off the concrete are not obstacles. They are the opening bracket of a pattern. Behind them are more, and the men speaking on the frequency are used to saying less and doing more. The strike bleeds pilots because the fight lasts longer than the fuel arithmetic assumed, because exits are covered by airplanes that still have the gas to climb, and because a small mistake at low level is punished by guns that have already been harmonized for this very range. When the day ends, the difference shows up on paper in a way that is almost boring. Sorties flown, serviceable rates, pilots returned, fuel expended, aircraft repaired overnight. The next day looks the same. That repetition is air superiority. It is not a banner or a claim of invincibility. It is the ability to choose fights and to force the other side to spend men to buy moments. In this window, the buying power is gone. The system that can still pay is the system that keeps arriving over the places that matter with enough fuel and enough calm to make the first contact the only one that counts. The belief that speed at treetop buys immunity lasts until the first minute over WWII. The approach is textbook low ingress under a lid, guns armed early, a single, clean pass to turn parked metal into smoke, then a fast egress along a river line. It begins that way. It does not end that way. The runway answers back while wheels are still folding. A pair of Mustangs rotate into the pass, turn inside the dust and put fire where the plan expected silence. The first German pilot to see that refuses to believe what the sightline says. He stays fast as taught. He expects the American to climb into a chop. The American does not. He levels for a breath, keeps his speed and reverses into the lane that was supposed to be safe. Reports written later will talk about losses and claims. The thing that matters is smaller and immediate. A leader glances left to pick his wingman and finds no one there. A controller back at a frozen radio truck hears more names than he can hold in one sentence. A flight that trained for the harvest finds itself in a turning fight over the wrong piece of ground, with fuel set for a dash, not a duel. The script that gave courage in the brief arrive cut leave no longer fits what the eyes are seeing. Disengagement, once an entitlement, becomes a calculation with poor inputs. Pulling up to trade speed for height exposes a belly to guns already harmonized for this range. Staying low keeps the ground close enough that one correction too far becomes a wingtip in trees. The exits are not empty. They have teeth. The first attempt to run east meets a blue nose that has climbed a sliver and is waiting in the door. The second attempt goes lower, then lower again, until the prop is beating air that is more branches than sky. A short burst ends the question. What erodes next is not bravado, it is procedure. In previous winters, a low strike counted on Allied reaction, lag a minute to understand, a minute to scramble, a minute to get organized. Over WWII, the first pair is already aloft with internal fuel and a sight picture that settles fast. Additional aircraft rise in 2s and 4s without chatter. The net carries angles, not stories. German formations look for the seam between launch and lock, between takeoff and pursuit, and do not find it. The seam has been sewn shut by maintenance and habit. On the ground side, armoured columns wait for daylight cover to thin. It does not thin. Fighter bombers move as scheduled because local air remains covered. Bridges lift, spray, and then smoke. Road junctions collect burned rubber. The line pushes because the ceiling that was supposed to shelter movement instead funnels raiders into measured traps. The day was meant to be stolen. It is rented by the minute at rates the payer cannot meet. Pilots inside the Luftwaffe formations feel the shift in their hands. The airplane still rolls like it should, the engine still answers, the guns still strike, but the freedom to choose place and length of fight is gone. Choice is the first relief for a man outnumbered. Without it, skill buys seconds, not safety. After WWII, the debrief tone changes. Claims shrink. Explanations lengthen. Notes about fuel appear earlier in paragraphs. Phrases like unexpected resistance and heavy reaction stand where successful pass once sat. The weather is blamed, the navigation points are blamed, but the runway that launched under fire remains the fact that cannot be talked away. For the Americans involved, nothing becomes epic. The lesson is dull on paper and lethal in the air. Keep fuel to fight after the rendezvous. Launch as soon as the ceiling lets a wing lift. Trust the ring. Ground crews file requests for parts and add a line about a nicked prop or a hot brake. Pilots note rounds expended, temperatures, observed times over field. The rhythm continues tomorrow. That rhythm is what the other side cannot match. A single morning can be written off as misfortune. A month of such mornings cannot. In formations across the front, caution grows. Leaders begin to avoid the thickest corridors unless ordered. Altitudes that promised safety now promise only a different kind of trap. The result is visible to anyone watching roads and depots. Fewer German fighters intrude where they did before, and when they do, they stay less long. The remaining boldness concentrates in small windows and specific weather, and even there it spends itself fast. When a chase begins, Mustangs are present both at the start and at the door. A belief survives longer than a wing. It dies in pieces. First goes the certainty that a field at rotation speed is helpless. Then goes the assumption that disengagement is always available if you are brave and early. Finally goes the private faith held by men who have survived on nerve that they can impose their plan on any sky if they arrive with enough speed. The winter denies that last part. It replaces the old feeling with a new one. You are being watched by airplanes that start every fight with the gas and tools to finish it. None of this announces itself with a speech. It is understood in gestures that shorten. German radio calls shrink. Egress turns begin earlier. Attacks on fields look less like scythes and more like pokes. The margin for error collapses, and men who used to spend it freely start to save it and still run out. Each loss takes a teacher. Each teacher lost makes the next day less survivable. The arithmetic is simple and unforgiving. When the New Year's smoke clears above Y-29, the field is still operating. The next sorties will go where the ground needs them. The units that attacked have fewer names to call roll with. The lesson travels outward, along squadron mess tables and briefing huts. It is retold without flourish. They took off under us, and were already in it. They stayed. The exits weren't empty. After that, plans adjust themselves in small human ways, more hedging, less push. From those adjustments, the larger pattern emerges. The change is not mystical. It is the end of an expectation and the start of a new baseline. Fast and low can still kill. It cannot unsettle the schedule that now governs daylight. The machine that keeps Mustangs at the places that matter continues to do so, and the men tasked to bleed that machine for time discover that time is what they no longer own. Film logs and field reports from New Year's morning harden into a pattern that repeats through the winter. The escorts arrive on time, arrive with fuel left after the rendezvous, and remain long enough to close doors that used to be open. Bomber losses on deep strikes ease downward in steps rather than headlines. Fighter-bomber schedules over the Ardennes and into the Rhine plain keep their blocks. Emergency requests from ground units meet fighters that are already in the air. Where the Luftwaffe does appear, contacts are shorter, disengagements, messier returns, lighter in leaders than in airframes. Airfields like Y-29 keep operating through the day. Turnaround sheets show guns, rebelted engines, inspected hot miner skin, and gear repairs completed on the line. The same call signs that took off at dawn are back on the board before noon. That continuity is the legacy that matters, a cadence the other side cannot match. A single, successful, low-level strike once bought hours. Now it buys minutes, sometimes less, and the price is paid in pilots the system cannot replace. The effect spreads outward from one runway to route networks and depots. Bridges along the Meuse and Ruhr begin to fail in sequence and stay down. Road junctions that needed a lucky cloud break to breathe now sit under quick-turn fighter cover. Armoured columns that depended on fog to move by day lose that shield because the fog no longer delays an escort launch. It only moves the launch a few miles down the map. Ground commanders adjust in a way that reads like common-sense plan, assuming daylight harassment will arrive and be surprised only when it does not. On German maps, the arrows shorten. The tempo that once moved on the assumption of a few clear hours now moves on the assumption that clear hours come with Mustangs. Luftwaffe unit diaries and post-action notes reflect a change in tone. Claims tighten. Excuses lengthen. Fuel and timing appear as lead paragraphs instead of postscripts. Crews write more often about unexpected fighters in the egress and reaction over target at takeoff. The morning lesson at WWII airfields can answer immediately. Exits are watched, migrates across sectors. Formation leaders begin to strip passes from plans, reduce dwell over targets, and pick thinner corridors. None of this restores initiative. It only reduces exposure, while the larger deficit experience and fuel deepens with each sortie. Training and replacement pipelines diverge further. Allied groups continue to rotate veterans, log gunnery and instrument hours, and seed new flights with men who have already flown the pattern of short calls, short bursts, and disciplined fuel checks. German formations increasingly fly with mixed experience, where the teachers are also the first to be lost when plans go wrong. The human legacy is not abstract. A month like January removes names that used to carry whole squadrons, and the knowledge they held does not travel fast enough to fill the holes. The next month inherits that gap. Industry and infrastructure convert the day's lesson into tomorrow's posture. Air depots deliver engines and spares on reliable timetables. Forward strips extend metal, and matting de-icing becomes routine, and perimeter tracks stay clear. The result is dull on paper and lethal in practice. Sortie counts hold, serviceable rates hold, and the escort belt over Western Europe stays thick even when weather breaks in patches. This is what kept air superiority looks like outside of a headline presence, repeated options preserved, the initiative to choose when and where to fight left on one side of the ledger. Strategically, the Luftwaffe remains capable of sharp pain, but it no longer controls length. It can still hit a bridge, tear up a column, or shock a quiet sector. It cannot sustain the sky long enough to change the ground outcome. That distinction spreads from the Ardennes to the Rhine crossings, and then to the first weeks across the river. Engineers work by daylight more often. Tactical reconnaissance completes circuits. Counterattacks form under a ceiling that is contested and lose their shape before they find momentum. The war does not end because of a single morning, but a single morning shows what the rest of the winter will require from both sides, and only one side can keep paying. For the record and for the viewer, two questions remain worth asking, because they point at the limits of machines versus the systems that use them. If deep escort discipline and fuel margins had matured 6 months earlier, does the Luftwaffe's fighter arm reach this winter in better shape, or do the ground pressures and fuel shortages still force the same collapse in tempo? And if a 109 or 190 retains edges in parts of the envelope roll, here, climb there, does any of it matter? Once the other side decides the place, the start time, and the length of contact, the channel's next step follows the chain we have been building. We move from the runway and the escort belt to the ground's perfect German medium, the Panther, and put it against an American answer, often dismissed as cheap. The question is the same as today's asked in steel. Instead of vapor, what happens when a good machine meets a system that will still be there after the first exchange?